A big game, a big risk, and a Big Mac. It's January 1994, and this is Yesterzine. Last month, I described 1993 as one of the standout years for gaming, and while looking at an early year edition of Nintendo Tome Superplay, proceeded to prove my point by looking at two games released that year. An F1 game with broken controls and a Sonic beta that wasn't. I tell you, it's a wonder they let me post on this site. I could probably represent Bluey in court for a parking offence and get her convicted of murder. And the parking offence. But we've got another chance because we're crossing the river to Sega Town and picking up Mega issue 16 dated January 1994, released on the 16th of December the previous year, and thus written during November. Rather than looking forward, we can look back at 1993 and maybe prove my point better. I'm sure it's only winners from here on out. Oh bloody hell. I'm sure it's almost all winners from here on out. We've got help. Mega published their annual Top 100. We'll take a close look at their Top 10 of 1993, almost identical to their Top 10 overall, to see how your Sega gaming year would have gone, and look at the ominous signs looming on the horizon for Sega's future. While we're there, Mega have a bee in their bonnet about something that's an equally hot topic 30 years later, and we'll see the genesis, get it, of a legendary developer be received about as well as a McDonald's salad. If you mourn the lack of a single magazine for every format now, it was absolutely mad in late 93. Future Publishing alone had Mega, covering the Mega Drive and CD, Sega Power, covering all the Sega machines even as releases for the 8-bits dwindled, and Sega Zone, previously covering all the machines but now 100% Mega Drive as it advertised a big feature on the Mega CD, notable Not a Mega Drive console. And if you want to debate that one because the Mega Drive plays Mega CD games by having extra hardware plugged into it, the same is true of Master System games. Days built one of my favourite channels on this premise. Future would solve the problem partially later in 1994 by selling both Sega Zone and Mega to Maverick magazines, which created a new problem because Maverick already had Sega Mega Drive Advanced Gaming and Megatech on their books, both of which had exactly the same remit as the two purchased titles. Predictably, Sega Zone lasted all of 4 issues at Maverick, the last of which had, and this is not a typo, 3 pages of editorial, in which they still managed to get one of the game names wrong. Maverick committed many crimes, we've chronicled them before, and we'll do it again. But this one ranks very high up the list. Thankfully, this is all before that. This Christmas issue of Mega is a full 116 lovely pages, and we've plenty to delve into within it. But first, a game. You'll probably recognise this, it's Gunstar Heroes, a classic run-and-gun game in the mould of a cartoony Contra. It got near universal acclaim a few months before this issue, getting 90s from everyone that matters, and the biggest honour of them all, a 6 out of 10 from Edge. Sega Power famously gave it the dreaded 73%, but given they apparently thought they were playing a platform game, can be safely ignored. And indeed, Treasure was formed to make this game, most of the team leaving Konami to do so, disillusioned by the former employer's insistence on making a lot of sequels, and keep that one in your brain because we'll be coming back to it later in the episode. The company was formed by Masato Maegawa, and his back catalogue is impressive, including The Simpsons arcade game, Castlevania 4, Contra 3, and Axlay, all early SNES titles that frequently make its top 10 lists today. Treasure tried to sell Konami on Gunstar and failed, and the same nearly happened at Sega if it wasn't for the involvement of Max Senior, the last of 13 producers with the budget to greenlight such a product. And even then, and here's the point, Treasure had to agree to a second project for Sega in order to unlock the funds, a licensed platform game from McDonald's. A more straight take on such things after the not entirely successful eco-message of Global Gladiators, a game Sega Power would later favourably compare to Gunstar Heroes. Oh, sorry, we weren't mentioning that, were we? A straight McDonald's platformer had worked before, under the names McDonaldland and MC Kids. Virgin had released one the previous year for NES, Game Boy and the popular home computers. That game starred the same Mick and Mac who were in Global Gladiators. Conversely, Treasure went the simple route. They cheekily called the game Treasure Land Adventure, and they used Ronald himself as the playable character, searching for pieces of a map to find, well, treasure. You can tell conceptually this was not the passion project of 1993 for them, can't you? They finished the game first, but Sega held on to it and pushed Gunstar out the door a month ahead of it, meaning that Treasure Land Adventure gets a review from Mega this month, and it's 55%. 55% is not the first impression, but that's not a surprise. Even at this early stage in their career, Treasure knew how to make an entrance, if only with their 3D logo. The game itself looks good immediately too. There are 16-bit versions of McDonald Land and Global Gladiators, but neither holds a candle in looks to this game. Ronald McDonald himself is drawn well enough he looks sinister, which, be honest, he scared the living shit out of you as a kid as well, right? The game is a platformer, unlike, say, Gunstar Heroes, but it's got its tricks. You've got to jump in accordance with normal legal statute, and you've got some sort of fairy dust of a shot. Hang on, I'll check the manual. Yeah, it's magic apparently. Presumably the magic of grade D beef and straws that dissolve in contact with milkshake. Traversal is also achieved via what is apparently Ronnie's scarf. You know, that famous scarf he's famous for having. Never seen him without it. But maybe this game is set in winter, and luckily, as you can see, his scarf is useful, essentially for him to do Batman impressions. Which might be more relevant than you think, because those famous Batman games were fresh in the mind at this point. Batman Returns on Master System is from this very year, for instance. It does make the levels dynamic, especially as Ronald immediately jumps up onto the target platform. But that also has a disadvantage. Frequently, these scarf jumps are blind, so more times than it should, it ends with Ronald yeeting himself directly into an enemy. This is countered by the fact the game is generous. You don't lose a life unless you lose all your gems, and plenty can be found, or earned from the drops from defeated enemies, or even bought in an in-game shop you sometimes come across. Admittedly, as an incompetent, I'm playing this game on the beginner difficulty, as you can well see because it chooses to splatter this right across the screen for me. In this respect, it shares a bit with its more glamorous development mate. Whereas games like Contra will kill you in a single hit in the Western release, Gunstar had a fairly generous amount of health in its chaos shooting gameplay. While certainly not being an easy game, Gunstar clearly wanted you to go out there and have fun without a game over every 30 seconds. And I see that in Treasure Land Adventure. Obviously, conceptually, it's responsibly pitched towards children as a walking advert for heart attacks in non-recyclable boxes. But the deeper you dig, the deeper you can see evidence of it being designed by the same people at basically the same time. Gunstar didn't have a lot of exploring, but it certainly rewarded experimentation. Treasure Land the same. It's worth poking around the levels for those bonuses. Find the right place and you can even get a tip from the Hamburglar on how to defeat the boss. You will notice this footage is from World of Long Plays, because I didn't. Treasure Land continues to be gorgeous. You can always skimp and get away with it on a licensed title, especially when you're literally doing as a contractual obligation. But this really doesn't. Ronald has an absurd number of animation frames for everything he does, and the design variety is impressive. Even this first world, the forest, is full of invention and variety. You start in lovely daylight, which transitions even during the level to twilight, and then to near full darkness. Meanwhile, the tree cover gets deeper, which is actually slightly annoying because it restricts your vision at times. You leave this in the dark into a more sinister, deeper forest with new perils and even rushing water. It took me a while to time, but then you have to cross a canyon with conveyor belt platforms, a whirlpool bonus section, and then a cavern. This is all in the first 10 minutes of the game. I don't want you to get too excited by the following comparison, because probably the game isn't quite as good as I'm going to make it sound. But if there is one game playing this reminded me of, it's Castle of Illusion. I remember saying when playing Castle that it had as many ideas in 15 minutes as some games have in their entire run, and you know what, that's true of this too. As always, I don't want to show you everything, but as soon as World 2 starts, you're on a moving train, incredibly different to the vertical tree levels you've just made your way through. The game introduces some circus-based enemies and even continues as you stop in a town, dodge cars and climb a skyscraper. and the game still isn't half over. The manual calls the remaining levels Magical Sea, where you're at least starting on the water, and mysteriously tells you very little about the finale, Magical Moon. But I'm telling you friends, I'm going to go try and see for myself. Yet maybe I'm overrating it a little by comparing it to one of the greatest platform games of all time. But McDonald's Treasureland Adventure is bloody great. Treasure put their whole arse into this, and it shows. The other two licensed games from the period get the attention, and I'm not unfond of both of them. But this is better. 55% is not quite the lowest score in the issue. That's Data East's mildly problematic Dashing Desperados, but it feels like a nonsense, so where's it come from? Well, the reviewer credits the game to Sega Japan rather than Treasure, which is technically correct, but you'd think they'd mention Treasure given that they had played Gunstar Heroes a couple of issues back, where they gave one of the Mega Drive's greatest games 64%. Wait, what? That review is basically a disgrace to the extent I'm not even sure they played the thing. At least unlike Sega Power, they don't call it a platformer, but their only actual nitpicks are claiming the plot is bad, who cares, and that it is dull and repetitive. Specifically, they claim the levels are, and I quote, almost identical. They will now follow a look at some of the stages. Mad, unless you penalise it for being a Contra-style run and gun. In which case, of course, they should have applied that reasoning to, say, 92% rated Street Fighter 2, which consists of a series of one-on-one fights without anyone ever taking a break for a platform level or a rhythm action game or a football match, like you get in 94% rated FIFA. The point of this is that their review of Treasureland Adventure suggests they played it for less time than you spent watching it. They describe it merely as a cute jumpy type platform game, which is both technically true and massively reductive. Other than that, the only information about the game is it has 4 worlds and they think it's too easy. They may have a point on that one, but it's an hour and 7 minutes long playthrough if you're perfect according to that World of Long Plays video from earlier, and that's 3 minutes longer than mega 94% rated game Sonic 2. I'm not saying it's Sonic 2. But ignore Mega here, especially if you're not buying it, and trust me you're not, it goes for silly money. If you liked Castle of Illusion especially, give this a punt. Maybe you do finish it in an hour, but that's going to be a fun hour of endless level variety from one of gaming's great action game creators. A miscarriage of review justice in the extreme. This is one of those Yesterzine features where establishing a narrative order is important. Because while Mega's Gripe of the Month is both interesting and completely unrelated to their Top 100 Games feature, it's also inextricably linked with it. And now I've told you that, I'm going to have to just start there in an attempt to explain what the bloody hell I'm wittering on about this time. Let's return to the news pages. Mega's opinion piece this month is about sequels, especially very samey sequels. 30 years ago, and this was already a problem apparently. It was prompted by the recent appearance of 2 games, one a true sequel and one that would now be considered more of a spin-off, but both of which differ massively from the games previously under their name in terms of gameplay. The first one is ToeJam & Earl 2, a game which moved from the almost indescribable genre exploration adventure of the first game to what, for the sake of this discussion, we can consider a platformer in the sequel, albeit a very clever one. The other might be more controversial 30 years later, Sonic Spinball, a spin-off created in an almost absurdly tight development timeline, mainly because it was becoming obvious to Sega that there was no chance in hell that Sonic 3 was going to make Christmas 1993. And indeed, it didn't. Although it was ultimately only a couple of months late thanks to the time-saving trick of cutting it in half and selling it twice. But this isn't the time for that. Nonetheless, this is the kind of thing Mega chose to call a sequel. whereas a subsequent game in a series which uses broadly the same mechanics as the previous one is to be called a follow-up for some reason. Highlighting Sonic 2, which they deem merely a follow-up, they talk to Sega's Andy Wright, who makes quite a bold play for a software company, man.
Sequels are only as good as the game contained inside them. Let the buyer beware they should really read reviews to find out what the games are like before they rush out and buy them blindly.
Hey Mega, what did you think of Sega's sequel Turbo Outrun when it was re-released for half price? Oh dear. He remains a little confused by first defending constant similar theme sequels by saying,
I think Sega would be foolish to move away from the classic Sonic style, because that's what people want. You buy a Sonic game because you know it's going to be a game of that type.
And we don't even have to do a comedic montage of Sonic Adventure, Sonic R, Sonic and Mario at the Olympic Games, not to mention the already released Sonic Spinball and Mean Bean Machine, because he then immediately goes on to say,
the Sonic games are not really sequels now. They're diversifications. They're extremely popular characters, and Sega would be foolish to limit themselves to doing just the Sonic games when they've got very, very good characters.
We've probably given Andy a hard enough time though, because the interest in this article for modern gamers comes from one of their other examples. John Madden American Football, the definitive NFL series that, occasionally dropping a word from its name, is still going today. Or rather, the third game in the series, going by the already streamlined moniker of Madden NFL 94. And this is rather Mega's point. They accept that 94 has an overhauled game engine, but say about this, 30 Madden games ago,
now the game has gotten as good as it can. Will there be any justification in doing any more?
Feel free to pick which bit of that to snort derisively at. The interesting historical part, though, is Mega's chat with EA's Nick Cannon.
Each sequel isn't aimed at the consumer who bought the game before. All the sequels are aimed at new Mega Drive owners. We wouldn't expect people who have got Madden 93 to buy Madden 94.
The sound you hear is EA Sports' modern marketing team spinning in their office chairs. Will they be publishing more Madden games than your mum's had hot everythings?
I think the updates will still happen simply because it's our policy to keep the games updated. And it gives people without any of the games the opportunity to get the best there is with the most up-to-date technology.
Chance to make fun of EA Sports before they went full chaotic evil aside, here's where we get to the point. Because while Mega attempt to use Madden as the poster child for do we need a sequel, with the game on its third of eventually 7 Mega Drive releases, they're certainly not going to punish it for it. Because not only will it appear in their top 10 for 1993, they've stuck it at number 1 in their all-time top 100 for the machine. Above any Sonic. Above anything involving actual football. It may be for the best Mega wouldn't review another Madden game. Sega Power would give 88% to the 1995 title without actually saying anything useful about it, and then give up and chop the near identical 1996 one to 49%. Still, it's not like they expect us to buy it every year. In any case, this is doing serious damage to what I suddenly remember was my contention that 1993 was a golden year of gaming. So while I tell you Sonic Spinball also makes the list, let's see what the remaining 8 golden titles of 93 were. Aladdin is an easy shout. While there's always a debate if the separate Mega Drive and SNES implementations of the license are better, let's go with the opinion of one Shinji Mikami on this, who said,
I would probably buy the Genesis one. Animation wise, I think the Genesis version's better. The Genesis version had a sword actually. I wanted to have a sword.
You may well not know Mikami-san, but he recently worked on Hi-Fi Rush and Ghostwire Tokyo, was director of Resident Evil, and was senior in the team that made Aladdin. On SNES. To be fair, Dave Not That One Perry, lead on the Mega Drive Aladdin, said the opposite himself, but given that was in response to Mikami-san, I'm going to assume he was just being nice. Either way, Aladdin would go on to be the best-selling non-Sonic game on the Jenny Drive, and in a world that already contained 2 Sonics, Mega call it the best platform game on the system. And the number 2 game overall. It's a brave shout, but it's a measure of Dave and the team's success that there aren't many Mega Drive fans who would consider it insane. And besides, it's not a sequel, it's an original IP for home consoles. Mega are proving their point here. The only way this could look embarrassing for them is if they awarded a mildly warmed over version of what was already a sequel with 3rd in the all-time top 100. You all saw that coming, right? To be fair, this is the first Street Fighter game to hit the Mega Drive, slightly as a dodge on various exclusivity agreements Nintendo had for it. Special Champion Edition is broadly a combination of the 2nd and 3rd arcade releases of Street Fighter 2, featuring mirror matches, the extra playable boss characters from Championship Edition, and the speed settings from Turbo. At the time, this was a more complete package than you could get on Nintendo, and the adverts were not shy at pointing that out. And so you can understand why Mega handed it 92% in the review and 3rd place in the top 100, and you assume would later harshly punish a cynical yearly update that just redrew some graphics, added in Cammy and 3 characters you probably can't even name, and would cost 70 actual quid on UK release, wouldn't you? I really should stop asking rhetorical questions, shouldn't I? It's worth reading that review of the, I remind you, £70 game Super Street Fighter 2, because Mega's 94% comes with the enthusiastic declaration,
"You're not getting a new game for your money."
And
Super Street Fighter 2 is only a slightly better game than its predecessor.
moving on. In the top 100 there is no number 6, and it's not a Portmeirion style conspiracy. They just say they can't split the first FIFA and Sensible Soccer, as they go about different things in equally good ways. It's the kind of cowardly fence-sitting cop-out I can absolutely appreciate, because I did it myself last month with Street Fighter 2 vs Mario Kart. In this case though, we have done this direct comparison, right back in episode 3 of this show, when Mean Machine Sega reviewed both titles. The answer is simple. Sensible has not aged a day in the last 30 years, and the Mega Drive one continues to be the single best version. In many ways, things are unfair for FIFA here. FIFA, or its recently reborn granddaughter EA Sports Football Club, trades on authenticity of the experience. FIFA has real teams, real players, real stadia, real competitions, and if you've played the original you know what's coming. FIFA 94, as you could refer to it now, has exactly none of the above. Half the players are members of the development team and there are no club teams, fictional or otherwise. With EA Sports Football Club, Electronic Arts realised they didn't need the FIFA licence for authenticity, as it was providing none of it. Given the original has the licence and none of the authenticity, you'd think they'd have realised decades earlier. Which leaves the battle on pure gameplay, as Sensi had no official licences either. And here's where FIFA suffers, both from EA itself taking another 30 plus cracks at the formula, whereas really Sensi only has its mild and inferior semi-sequel World of Soccer for competition, and from the fact that simulations always have a tendency to age worse than arcade games, as they lean more on the technology to do their work. Nonetheless, in the top 10, Mega only features FIFA, and maybe that's because the Mega Drive can claim it as its own, whereas Sensi of course was an Amiga port. They do also make the point in the verdict box that FIFA has probably the better multiplayer game. Not sure I'm going to agree with them on that one. As an aside, the danger of a top 100 even this late in the machine's life. They mentioned that before these two came along, the nearest thing the Mega Drive had was the
Decidedly average
Super Kickoff. It's at number 64. I'm not sure anyone wants to sit through another top 100, and we've got more to talk about, but if you want some proof of the folly, number 100 is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, a game that isn't just decidedly average but aggressively bad. Mega sell it with,
take a careful look at this before you buy it.
Gunstar Heroes, by the way, does not make the top 100. The barrage of bangers continues back at the 1993 Hall of Fame though, with platform adventure Flashback. What happens when Another World and Prince of Persia have a baby? It's a game that's bound to come up. Talk to anyone who played it and you'll get tales of an expansive, beautifully written and realised adventure that I don't own on Mega Drive. It's okay though, I somehow do own Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Mega do make one miss with the conclusion, suggesting that they would be surprised if we don't see Flashback 2 in the next year. Flashback 2 does exist. It came out this month. I'm being pedantic here, as many viewers are already yelling the name of the previous sequel Fade to Black, which didn't quite hit their deadline but did make the early PlayStation era. If FIFA got the nod into this top 10 as a multiplayer title, then there is no freer B than the next title, Micro Machines. We're before the innovative J-Kart and the 4-joypad 8-player madness that would result from that, but Mega tell the story themselves of a title originally released on the NES, like a lot of early Codemasters console forays, and which they laughed at. Then played. And played. And played. In hindsight, it's not perfect. Probably all 3 of its Mega Drive sequels are better games for both the single and multiplayer. All 3, for instance, were released with that J-Kart setup, and this original does sometimes give away that it's essentially a remaster of a game designed for a, by then, decade-old machine. But if it's you and a mate, none of this matters. There were no brilliant kart racers on Mega Drive at this point, even Street Racer was over a year away. But the 1993 SNES did not have Micro Machines, and as a pick-up-and-play 2-player battle, this might even be better than Mario Kart. Mega acted shocked at the existence of the next one, isometric RPG Landstalker. It's by Climax, who were then an obscure Japanese developer. Landstalker was their first solo effort, but it came off the back of helping with one of the very first Mega Drive RPGs, Shining in the Darkness, and its considerably more famous successor, Shining Force. And as much as Mega will hope at the end of this article for a Landstalker 2 from them, they were done with the Mega Drive already. And other than a return to Shining Force with a Game Boy Advance game in 2004, didn't make a huge impression on Western shores again. It was at this point I remember I did try this, because it's on the Mega Drive Mini. I did a video at the time where I gave every game 15 minutes just to give first impressions on it for people who were going to buy that machine. I say every game, this got 20. Unfortunately, that wasn't because I liked it. It was because the first 20 minutes of the game appeared to consist entirely of unskippable exposition and busy work. I hadn't so much as seen an enemy, and the most interaction I had was scattering books around a church. To be fair to Mega, the machine didn't yet have the wonderful Beyond Oasis, but you do, whether you're playing your games via nefarious means or on the Mega Drive Mini. Personally, I'd advise you to go play that and pretend it's this, or even try one of those Shining Force games. Our penultimate game represents a theory I've seen a couple of times now, and I really should test one of these days. Jungle Strike appears in this list, and you'd expect that over its more famous father Desert Strike, because Jungle Strike has 100% more released in 1993. And let's not talk about Mega's already forgotten stance about similar sequels, because they certainly don't. Jungle, though, is 9th in the overall list. Only Sonic 2 makes the top 10 from pre-1993 releases. And Desert not only misses out on that, but is as low as 35 in the overall list, one below Golden Axe 3, which they give the fulsome praise.
It's not one to fight your next-door neighbour's pitbull terrier for.
Mega don't offer me much to work with. Simply pulling out tweaked graphics, enhanced sound and more missions is enough to make it a legitimate sequel. Desert has always been enough for me. It's not like I ever finished it, so I'll have to make a note to give this a proper try. But if you have, feel free to hit me up in the comments and tell me if I've been missing out, or if this is just an over-celebrated DLC in kart form. Lastly, a weird decision. Despite making the top 10 overall and being released in 1993, NHL 94 does not make the top 10 of 1993 list. What does instead is 39th placed game Mortal Kombat, which Mega call
a bit tedious in one-player mode?
And it is. It's also not as good as Street Fighter 2, it just isn't. Mortal Kombat 2 the next year and we'll have a discussion, but the first attempt is a definite first attempt. I assume Mega just didn't want to include 2 EA Sports annual updates in their top 10, and they do point out the Mega Drive version did retain the blood effects lost from Nintendo's offering, which gave them the chance of a snipe at the big N. So have I proven my point about 1993? Pretty much, I'd say. If you were a very, very lucky little gamer, you might manage to get 10 games in a year. And if those 10 were these 10, then you were pretty much set for life. All you'd be missing was a proper Sonic platformer outing. And I'd swap Mortal Kombat for that and keep playing Street Fighter 2. I'd also grab a cheap copy of NHLPA 93 over 94, paid for by the savings of buying one of the many cheap copies of Madden 93 readers were advertising for sale right there in the top 10. It's not like you'd notice the difference after all. The other reason I claim 1993 was special was it's the first and probably only 3-generation year. The first glimpses of our future were out, with the 3DO, Mega CD and Jaguar showing various versions of near infinite storage and throwing 3D worlds around like your star went supernova. We know how strong the 16 bits were, and to match Mega's top 10, I easily found 9 for the Veteran Master System from the same 12 months, and none of those were on any other home console. That now changes rapidly. The NES essentially dies off in Europe, and the SMS's list for 1994 is near exclusively Mega Drive hand-me-downs, albeit some very, very good ones. The PlayStation reaches Japan late in 1994 as well, meaning video gaming is about to change forever. So what's Sega's response to this time of turbulent change? Well, let's exclude one thing immediately. It's not the 32X. Despite the fact the Saturn is public, the 32X isn't and won't be until June. One day we'll get into how bad an idea all of this was, but suffice to say, from the perspective of predicting 1994, Mega didn't know about it, and the rest of us mostly just wish we didn't. They structured the first half of the piece around calling up a friendly third-party developer who may or may not have actually existed. Said developer is showing off the Saturn development kit they already have, and they're enthusiastic about the power, describing it as more powerful than the Atari Jaguar. I'll pause for laughter as the hardware nerds remind us the Jaguar is based around the exact same CPU that's in the Mega Drive, albeit with quite a lot of help. More relevantly, the developer compares it favourably to Sega's Virtua Racing coin-op, and this is before Sega added another graphics chip to the thing in early 1994, thanks to rumours of, to coin a phrase, the power of PlayStation. You'd hope it was. Arcades were still some mythical entity at this point, but the Model 1 used by Virtua Racing, and indeed the first Virtua Fighter, was getting on a bit, and was already replaced for most new development. In the event, direct communication with the arcade went the other way, Sega using Saturn hardware to create the cheaper Titan video system.
And Sega planned to release this for less than $300?
Asks Mega. Yes, says the dev, but that's not how it turned out. The Saturn would cost $400 or pounds by the time it made it out, which was a problem when Sony's price announcement would become possibly the single most famous piece of games video in history.
$299.
Amazingly, they claim it hadn't been decided, well less than a year from launch and clearly with games in development, whether the machine would use CDs, carts or both. Protecting their cart manufacturing revenue is what Mega cited as the reason. Nintendo would expect us to believe it was about loading times when they made the cart decision with the 64. In the event, the Saturn would be a CD-only console. Although it did have a cartridge slot, it was primarily used for an official RAM expansion and a very useful vector for later hardware hackers. The real glimpse of the future from Mr. X though is the concept of completely digital games. Sega had tipped their toe into this before with the Mega Drive based Sega Channel over cable TV networks, but this would be a much bigger ask for games 200 times larger than those on Mega Drive. Home broadband capable of that was a long way off in most countries, probably at least a decade, and in the event the Saturn had no useful network connectivity, and even the Dreamcast only a modem that would take over a day to download a full CD-sized game. It's worth waiting for, of course. After all, digital games would end up
A whole lot cheaper for the games player.
In the event, digital games are of course reality today. Even your physical game is probably going to end up downloading most of itself. But Sega's console business would not live to see it become mainstream. Sega's grand plans falling apart around them was going to be rather a feature of their next and last half-decade in the console business. And looking back at this article brings it straight home to you. They talk about Sega having put the effort into their DSP, the equivalent of the SNES's in-cartridge polygon puncher, the Super FX chip. This was used to get the aforementioned Virtua Racing to just about run on the Mega Drive, and Mega looked forward to the series of games that were to follow, starting with a conversion of Virtua Fighter, which as mentioned used the same arcade hardware. It didn't happen. None of them happened. Projects were shuffled onto one or both of the Saturn or, God help us, the 32X instead. Still, that's nothing compared to what they thought they could pull off hardware-wise in the meantime. Anyone who has used any virtual reality system will know the one thing they need is power. You need 90 frames a second and huge resolutions to avoid nausea-inducing lag, and thus, while sometimes spectacular, games are not always lookers in static shots. Sega thought they could make VR in 1992. And not even for the Saturn. It was originally planned for the Mega Drive. Given that most 3D games on an unassisted Mega Drive were lucky to see 9 frames a second, much less 90, and how ambitiously rubbish even the Jaguar VR attempt was, they wisely backed off on this and rejigged it as a Saturn add-on. It was going to be sub £200. They had 4 games ready, including 3 shooting games that sounded near identical, and the obligatory driving game that for some reason wasn't a conversion of any of their coin-ops. There's very little information about this system other than they showed it to some real humans and it was quietly and permanently shelved shortly afterwards. At best, they were probably laughed at. At worst, they're probably still cleaning the vomit off the walls. I wonder if the world would maybe have gone differently if Sega had not made the 32X, had pulled off some good DSP games in the meantime to plug the gap, and keep the non-early adopters pointing at Mega Drive. If they'd somehow pulled off something VR people could actually play. And if the Saturn, a much better machine than it usually gets credit for, hadn't been abandoned publicly by their senior management 2 years before they had a replacement for it. Or maybe the forthcoming Sony-shaped steamroller was just too big. On the back page, at a loss this Christmas, would rather do anything than watch the same tired Christmas TV that reminds you of Christmas every 5 seconds? Well, join us Christmas Day for the 2nd annual Sub 5000 TV. Videos from 30 of your favourite YouTube channels, bookended with continuity, retro adverts, unseen specials, and absolutely no mention of denominational holidays. You will see, in no particular order, deep breath, Rose Tinted Spectrum, Retro Bites, A Richard Pictured, Yawning Angel, Slopes Game Room, Timberwolf, OK Gamer Girl, Sharka's Retro Bites, Retrograde Scene, Binnie's Retro, Tech Made Easy, Cogweasel, Yesterzine, makes sense, Floppy Deep Dive, What Ho Snorkers, Control Alt Reese, Geigerpunk, More Fun Making It, Pixel Asylum, Zylog and Moto, Oddpod, Blogos Pow, A Bad Education TV, Naoki's Retro Corner, Tamaracade, Lee Smith's Workshop, CRG Glenn, Super Jimtendo, Raspberry, Retro Crazy, and probably more because frankly I've lost all track and have just said the word retro more than any time since the moon landings. It's your whole day escape, whether that be when it premieres on Christmas Day, or any time you need a happy, no-stress distraction break. And if you want a preview, then check the description because last year's edition is still available. And once you finish that, join us on the 29th for the last Yesterzine of the year, which is mad. I'm writing this in October. Happy bonfire night past you!